The phone rang at exactly 9:15 on a Tuesday morning, jolting me from my morning coffee routine. Marcus, my older brother, who I had not spoken to in 10 years. His voice trembled through the speaker as he asked if we could meet, claiming he desperately needed my help with something urgent. 10 years ago, when I was just 16 and had lost everything, he made a choice that shattered what remained of our family. Now here he was, reaching out like those years of silence never happened. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you have ever felt abandoned by family, and subscribe, because this story shows how sometimes the people who hurt us the most become the ones who need us later. Trust me, you will not see this ending coming. Before that phone call turned my world upside down again, I need to take you back to when everything fell apart the first time. I was 16, the baby of 4 siblings, in what everyone considered the perfect American family. Marcus was 28, already established in his career at a prestigious law firm downtown. Dylan, 26, worked in real estate and was planning his wedding to his longtime girlfriend Sarah. Cameron, 24, had just graduated from business school and was making waves in the tech industry. Then there was me, little Hazel, still figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, but dreaming of becoming an architect like our father. Our parents, David and Linda, had raised us with one unshakable principle that echoed through our house daily: family sticks together. Sunday dinners were sacred in our household, with everyone gathering around our large oak dining table to share stories from the week. Dad would always lead us in saying grace, thanking God for keeping our family healthy and united. Mom would beam with pride as she watched her 4 children laugh and tease each other over her famous pot roast. Those evenings felt like they would last forever, wrapped in the warm certainty that we would always have each other no matter what life threw our way. I was particularly close to Mom, spending hours with her in the kitchen, learning family recipes that had been passed down through generations. She would tell me stories about great-grandma Rose while we kneaded bread dough, painting pictures of strong women who persevered through hardships by leaning on family. Dad and I bonded over blueprints and building models, his patient explanations of structural engineering, fueling my dreams of designing beautiful homes where families like ours could create lasting memories. Everything felt secure, predictable, and permanent. That illusion shattered on a rainy October evening, when Mom and Dad went to the grocery store for their weekly shopping trip. I stayed home to finish a calculus assignment that was due the next day, completely absorbed in solving equations at the kitchen table. The call came at 8:43. Marcus' voice was barely recognizable as he choked out words that did not make sense: car accident, hospital, critical condition. I remember dropping the phone and running to my room to grab a sweater, my hands shaking so violently I could barely pull it over my head. At the hospital, the 4 of us huddled together in the stark waiting room, clinging to hope that became more fragile with each passing hour. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about traumatic brain injuries and internal bleeding, medical terms that sounded like a foreign language. We took turns holding vigil by their bedsides, whispering promises that they would pull through, that our family was too strong to be broken by this tragedy. But sometimes life does not care how strong you think you are. They passed away within hours of each other, Mom first and then Dad, as if he could not bear to exist in a world without her. The funeral felt surreal, like watching someone else's life play out on a movie screen. Friends and neighbors filled the church, sharing memories of the wonderful couple who had touched so many lives. My brothers and I sat in the front row, numb with grief, but united in our shared loss. Marcus held my hand during the service, while Dylan kept his arm around my shoulders. Cameron whispered that we would get through this together, that Mom and Dad would want us to take care of each other. Those first few weeks after the funeral felt like we might actually honor that promise. I moved into Marcus' guest bedroom since he had the biggest house and was financially stable enough to support me. He made an effort to cook dinner most nights, though his culinary skills were nowhere near Mom level. Dylan and Cameron stopped by regularly, bringing groceries or just sitting with us to watch television in comfortable silence. We were all grieving, but it felt like we were doing it as a unit, the way our parents had taught us to face any challenge life presented. But gradually, subtle changes began creeping into our new normal that made my stomach twist with unease. Marcus would get frustrated when I needed help with homework snapping that he had his own work deadlines to worry about. Phone calls between my brothers became more frequent, and secretive conversations that stopped abruptly whenever I entered the room. I started catching fragments of discussions about responsibility and burden words that cut through me like ice water. Dylan mentioned boarding school options during one visit, while Cameron suggested I might be happier living with our aunt in Colorado. The turning point came when I overheard Marcus talking to his colleague from work, explaining that raising a teenager was interfering with his chances of making partner at the firm. He complained about having to adjust his schedule around my school activities and how the additional expense was straining his budget. The person on the other end of the conversation suggested that there were resources available for situations like ours, facilities specifically designed to help kids who had lost their parents. Marcus' response haunted me. Maybe that would be for the best. I tried desperately to make myself invisible to prove that I was not the burden they clearly saw me as becoming. I took over all the household chores, did my own laundry, and never asked for anything beyond basic necessities. When Dylan visited the following weekend, I cheerfully served snacks and pretended not to notice how he avoided making eye contact with me. Cameron brought me a small gift, a book about architecture that felt more like a goodbye present than a gesture of brotherly love. The writing was on the wall, but I refused to read it clearly, because accepting the truth would mean acknowledging that the family I had left was about to abandon me too. The conversation that would change everything happened on a gray Thursday afternoon in November, exactly 6 weeks after our parents' funeral. Marcus called Dylan and Cameron over for what he described as a family meeting, though the serious expressions on their faces told me this was more like a trial where the verdict had already been decided. They arranged themselves on the living room couch while I sat across from them in dad-old recliner, feeling smaller than I ever had in my entire life. Marcus cleared his throat and began speaking in the same professional tone he used with clients at his law firm. He explained that after careful consideration and numerous discussions, they had all agreed that the current living arrangement was not sustainable for anyone involved. They believed it would be in my best interest to go somewhere I could receive proper care and supervision, somewhere specifically equipped to help teenagers navigate the challenges of growing up without parents. The words felt like physical blows, each one landing harder than the last. I could not believe what I was hearing. These were my brothers, the same people who had promised just weeks earlier that we would stick together no matter what. I reminded them of every Sunday dinner conversation about family loyalty, every bedtime story Mom had told us about relatives who supported each other through impossible circumstances. My voice cracked as I begged them to reconsider promising I would be even less trouble, that I would get a part-time job to help with expenses, anything to avoid being sent away from the only family I had left. Dylan tried to soften the blow by explaining that they were all too young to properly raise a teenager, that none of them had experience with the kind of guidance and support I needed during such a crucial time in my development. He talked about his upcoming wedding to Sarah and how they were not prepared to include a grieving teenage sister in their new life together. Cameron remained mostly silent, occasionally nodding in agreement, but unable to meet my desperate gaze. Marcus emphasized that this decision was not about love or wanting me gone, but about providing me with the best possible environment for my future success. But I could see through their carefully crafted explanations to the selfish motivations underneath. Marcus wanted to focus entirely on his career advancement, without the complication of guardian responsibilities interfering with his networking events and overtime hours. Dylan was worried about how having a teenage sister around might affect his relationship with Sarah, who had already expressed concerns about taking on such a significant responsibility so early in their marriage. Cameron had received an opportunity to pursue his MBA program in Europe, a chance he was not willing to sacrifice for the sake of family obligations. The most painful realization was discovering that this was not a recent decision born out of desperation. They had been discussing my future since the day after the funeral, carefully researching options and making plans without any input from me. I had been living in Marcus' house, believing that we were figuring things out together as a family, while they were actually just buying time to arrange my removal from their lives. The betrayal cut deeper than the original loss of our parents, because this was a choice, not a tragic accident beyond anyone's control. Marcus handed me several brochures for group homes and foster care facilities, pointing out amenities like tutoring programs and counseling services, as if he was selling me a vacation package. He assured me that I would be able to call whenever I needed anything, that they would always be my brothers, no matter where I lived. But his eyes told a different story, one where I would become an occasional Christmas card recipient, rather than a daily part of his existence. I spent my final night in Marcus' house staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of a place that had never really become home. Down the hallway, I could hear him on the phone, with someone probably finalizing arrangements for my placement. The house felt hollow, stripped of the warmth and connection that had once defined our family gatherings here. I packed my belongings into 2 suitcases, carefully folding the sweater Mom had knitted for my last birthday, and placing Dad architectural books at the bottom where they would not get damaged. The drive to Sunshine Group home the next morning was filled with uncomfortable silence and unspoken regrets. Marcus kept adjusting the radio volume and clearing his throat as if he wanted to say something meaningful, but no words came. I watched familiar neighborhood landmarks pass by the car window, knowing I might not see them again for a very long time. When we finally pulled up to a modest 2-story building with chipped paint and overgrown landscaping, my heart sank even further. Marcus walked me to the front door carrying my suitcases, his movements stiff and mechanical. He introduced me to Mrs. Peterson, the house director, with forced cheerfulness that fooled no one. Before leaving, he pressed an envelope containing $200 in cash into my hands and promised to call soon to check on how I was settling in. We both knew that call would never come. I stood on the front steps and watched his car disappear around the corner, taking with it any remaining illusion that blood relations guaranteed unconditional love or loyalty. Sunshine Group Home looked exactly like what it was, a place where unwanted children went to wait for better options that might never materialize. The building exterior needed fresh paint, the front yard was more weeds than grass, and the windows had that institutional quality that screamed government-funded facility. But stepping inside, I was surprised to find that Mrs. Peterson had worked hard to create a warm and welcoming environment, despite obvious budget constraints. Mismatched furniture was arranged in cozy conversation areas. Children artwork covered the walls, and the smell of homemade cookies drifted from the kitchen. Mrs. Peterson, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair, gave me a tour of what would become my new reality. The bedrooms were small but clean, each shared by 2 residents who had learned to respect each other's limited privacy. The common areas included a study room with donated computers, a television lounge with furniture that had seen better days, and a kitchen where older kids were expected to help prepare meals for the group. Everything felt temporary and makeshift, but there was an underlying sense of genuine care that I had not expected. My roommate was a 17-year-old girl named Jade, who had been in the system since she was 12. Her parents had disappeared one day, leaving her to fend for herself until a neighbor finally called social services. She introduced me to the other residents with the casual efficiency of someone who had watched dozens of kids come and go over the years. Tony, 15, had been removed from his home due to severe neglect and was counting down the days until he could age out of the system. Little Emma, only 12, still believed her mother would come back to get her, despite being at Sunshine for almost 2 years. Those first few weeks were the loneliest of my entire life. Every day I checked my phone, hoping for a message from Marcus Dillon or Cameron, some sign that they missed me or regretted their decision. The silence was deafening. I would lie awake at night listening to Jade quiet breathing and wondering how my life had changed so dramatically in such a short period of time. Just months earlier, I had been a cherished youngest daughter, with a bright future ahead of me. Now, I was just another displaced kid learning to navigate a system designed for people no one else wanted. But something shifted in me around the 2-month mark when I finally accepted that no rescue was coming. Marcus was not going to call and ask me to come home. Dylan was not going to realize that family should come before his new wife wishes. Cameron was not going to choose his sister over his European adventures. I was completely and utterly on my own, and that realization was both terrifying and oddly liberating. If I wanted a different life, I was going to have to build it myself. Mrs. Peterson became my unlikely mentor during this transformation, recognizing something in me that even I had not seen yet. She encouraged me to channel my anger and hurt into productive activities, starting with my schoolwork. My grades had suffered during those first chaotic months of grief and adjustment, but she helped me create study schedules and connected me with tutoring resources. She also shared her own story of overcoming abandonment by family members who had written her off as a lost cause, showing me that it was possible to build a meaningful life despite starting from scratch. I threw myself into academics with the intensity of someone who had nothing left to lose. My grade point average climbed steadily as I discovered that succeeding in school was something I could control completely. Unlike family relationships, academic achievement was based on merit rather than luck or circumstance. I spent hours in the study room working on assignments and reading ahead in my textbooks, driven by a growing determination to prove that my brothers had made a massive mistake in giving up on me. Mrs. Peterson helped me research scholarship opportunities and college preparation programs, opening my eyes to possibilities I had never considered before. She drove me to campus visits during her free time and helped me practice for standardized tests that would determine my future options. When I expressed interest in pursuing architecture like my father had, she connected me with a local firm that offered internships to promising high school students. Slowly but steadily, I began building a support network of people who believed in my potential. My part-time job at Corner Cafe became another source of stability and purpose. The owner, Mr. Rodriguez, had a soft spot for kids from difficult backgrounds and was patient while I learned to juggle work responsibilities with my demanding academic schedule. The job taught me practical skills about money management and customer service, while providing the income I needed to buy clothes, supplies, and other necessities that foster care budgets could not cover. More importantly, it gave me confidence that I could take care of myself, independent of anyone else's support or approval. High school graduation day arrived with a mixture of pride and bittersweet longing. Mrs. Peterson sat in the audience along with Jade Toniema and several other current and former Sunshine residents who had become my chosen family. My biological brothers were notably absent, not because they had not been invited, but because they probably had no idea this milestone was even happening. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I thought about Mom and Dad and how proud they would have been to see their youngest daughter succeeding despite everything that had tried to knock her down. The full scholarship to State University felt like winning the lottery validation that all those late-night study sessions and weekend internships had been worth the sacrifice. Mrs. Peterson cried harder than I did when the acceptance letter arrived, understanding better than anyone what this opportunity represented. College would be my chance to completely reinvent myself, to build an identity based on my own choices, rather than the circumstances that had defined my teenage years. University life presented new challenges that tested everything I had learned about resilience and self-reliance. My roommate Ashley came from a wealthy family and initially could not understand why I worked 20 hours a week on top of carrying a full course load. But she gradually became one of my closest friends, admiring my determination and work ethic, while helping me navigate social situations that felt foreign to someone from my background. I dated occasionally, including a serious relationship with Jake during my junior year, but ultimately decided that romantic relationships were a luxury I could not afford while building my career foundation. My architecture professors quickly recognized my talent and passion for the field, providing mentorship and connecting me with prestigious internship opportunities. I spent one summer working for a firm in Chicago, living in a tiny sublet apartment, and learning advanced design software that would give me advantages in the job market. Another summer was spent in Portland with a company that specialized in sustainable building practices, expanding my knowledge and building professional relationships that would prove valuable later. Graduation from college felt like crossing a finish line I had been running toward for years. Magna cum laude honors job offers from multiple firms, and a carefully planned future that belonged entirely to me. The scared 16-year-old girl who had been dropped off at Sunshine Group Home had transformed into a confident professional ready to take on the world. When Miller and Associates offered me a position in their downtown office, I knew I had found the perfect place to begin building the successful career I had always dreamed of having. My early years at Miller and Associates were marked by 60-hour work weeks and a relentless drive to prove myself worthy of every opportunity I received. I volunteered for challenging projects that other junior architects avoided, stayed late to perfect presentations, and sought feedback from senior partners who appreciated my dedication and fresh perspectives. My designs began gaining recognition within the firm, and clients specifically requested to work with me on their residential projects. The apartment I bought at 25 was modest, but entirely mine furnished with pieces I had carefully selected and saved for over several months. Walking through my own front door each evening felt like a small victory proof that I had successfully created the stable home environment that had been ripped away from me so many years earlier. I decorated with family photos that included Mrs. Peterson Ashley and other people who had chosen to be part of my story, rather than biological relatives who had written me out of theirs. By age 26, my success was undeniable by any reasonable measure. I had been promoted to senior associate at Miller and Associates. My designs had been featured in local architectural magazines, and my financial situation was stable enough to start considering buying a house. I volunteered with organizations that supported young people in foster care, using my experience to help others navigate similar challenges. Life was good, fulfilling, and entirely self-made. But late at night, in quiet moments between the busy demands of my professional world, I sometimes wondered what had become of Marcus, Dylan, and Cameron. That Tuesday morning phone call shattered the peaceful routine I had built over the past decade. Marcus' voice on the other end of the line sounded strained and desperate, nothing like the confident older brother who had once made decisions about my future without consulting me. He stumbled through small talk about the weather and asked generic questions about my well-being, before finally admitting the real reason for his call. He needed help, specifically financial assistance, and he was hoping we could meet to discuss what he described as a temporary family emergency. The irony was not lost on me. The same man who had decided I was too much of a burden to support was now asking me to support him during his time of need. I listened silently as he explained that he had been laid off from the law firm 6 months earlier due to budget cuts and corporate restructuring. His wife, Jennifer, had been diagnosed with a chronic illness that required expensive treatments not fully covered by their insurance plan. They were behind on mortgage payments and facing the possibility of losing the house they had lived in for 15 years. But Marcus was not calling alone on behalf of only himself. Dylan was also struggling financially after his divorce from Sarah had left him responsible for substantial alimony and child support payments, while his real estate business suffered during a market downturn. He had moved back into Marcus' guest bedroom temporarily, which was adding stress to an already difficult household situation. Cameron had returned from Europe with impressive credentials, but no immediate job prospects, having discovered that his specialized MBA program had not prepared him for the American job market as effectively as he had hoped. The three of them were living together again for the first time since we were young, but this reunion was born out of desperation rather than choice. Marcus carefully avoided directly asking me for money during that initial phone call, instead suggesting that we should reconnect as siblings and see if there might be ways we could help each other through difficult times. He proposed meeting for coffee to catch up properly, emphasizing how much he had missed having me in his life, and how sorry he was that we had lost touch over the years. I agreed to meet them the following Saturday at a neutral location downtown, partly out of curiosity about how dramatically their lives had changed, and partly because Mrs. Peterson had always encouraged me to leave doors open for reconciliation when it was safe to do so. The coffee shop I chose was upscale and modern, the kind of place that would remind them of the professional success I had achieved without their support or encouragement. I arrived early and selected a table where I could observe their entrance and reactions to seeing me after so many years. Marcus walked in first, and I barely recognized the man who had once intimidated me with his confidence and authority. His hair had thinned considerably and was now more gray than brown. His suit was expensive, but showed signs of wear, and his posture suggested someone carrying the weight of significant stress. Dylan followed close behind, looking older than his 36 years, with lines around his eyes that spoke of recent struggles. Cameron brought up the rear, still handsome, but lacking the cocky self-assurance that had once defined his personality. Their shock at my appearance was immediately obvious. I had dressed professionally in a tailored blazer and dress that conveyed both success and confidence. My hair was styled in a way that projected competence, and I carried myself with the bearing of someone who belonged in boardrooms and client meetings. They had expected to find the lost, vulnerable teenager they had abandoned, not the accomplished woman I had become through my own determination and hard work. The conversation started awkwardly with Marcus attempting to bridge the gap of years through surface-level questions about my job and living situation. When I mentioned my position at Miller and Associates, Dylan's eyes widened with recognition, since he knew the firm reputation in the local construction industry. Cameron seemed particularly interested in the financial aspects of my career, asking pointed questions about salary ranges and advancement opportunities that revealed more about his current desperation than genuine curiosity about my achievements. As the afternoon progressed, they gradually revealed the extent of their current problems. Marcus' legal career had stalled long before his recent layoff, as his inability to maintain stable personal relationships had hurt his networking effectiveness. Dylan's real estate business had suffered because he lacked the discipline to manage his finances properly during good years, leaving him vulnerable when market conditions changed. Cameron's European adventure had been funded by credit cards and student loans that now demanded repayment despite his unemployment status. They had burned through their inheritance from our parents years earlier on various failed investments and lifestyle expenses that had seemed affordable at the time. The house that Marcus lived in was mortgaged far beyond its current market value, and creditors were beginning to pursue aggressive collection actions. They needed someone to co-sign loans, provide direct financial assistance, or help them develop a realistic plan for recovery. As family members, they felt I had some obligation to help them avoid complete financial ruin. I listened to their requests without making any immediate commitments, explaining that I needed time to consider the situation carefully. The wounded 16-year-old inside me wanted to remind them of how they had abandoned me when I needed family support the most. But the successful adult I had become was more interested in understanding what kind of relationship, if any, was possible going forward. I told them I would contact them within a week with my decision about how I wanted to proceed. That evening, I called Mrs. Peterson to discuss the situation with someone who understood both my history and my current position. She listened patiently as I described the meeting and the complex emotions it had stirred up, including anger, sadness, and a small part of me that still longed for family connection, despite everything that had happened. Her advice was characteristically wise. Forgiveness was something I could choose for my own peace of mind, but that did not mean I was obligated to enable their poor choices or put my own financial security at risk. After several days of reflection, I decided to meet with my brothers one more time to share my final decision. This time, I chose the restaurant at the top of the office building where Miller and Associates was located, a space that represented everything I had achieved independently. I wanted them to see the world I had built, without them to understand that their rejection had ultimately been my liberation, rather than my destruction. I arrived at the restaurant first and secured a table with a view of the city skyline, the same skyline that included several buildings I had helped design over the past few years. When my brothers joined me, they seemed even more uncomfortable than they had been at our previous meeting. The elegant surroundings and expensive menu made it clear that I was operating at a different level than they were, that I had moved far beyond the dependent teenager they remembered. Marcus began the conversation by reiterating their financial difficulties and expressing hope that we could work together as family to find solutions that would benefit everyone involved. Dylan added that they had always regretted losing touch with me and wanted to rebuild our sibling relationships, regardless of any financial considerations. Cameron mostly remained quiet, but his body language suggested he was uncomfortable with the entire situation. I let them finish their appeals before responding with the speech I had been preparing for days. I acknowledged their current struggles and expressed sympathy for the genuine hardships they were facing. But I also reminded them of the choice they had made 10 years earlier when I needed family support the most. They had taught me that family relationships were conditional, that blood ties meant nothing when they conflicted with personal convenience or ambition. Their decision to place me in foster care had been devastating at the time, but it had also given me something invaluable: the knowledge that I could survive and thrive entirely on my own merit. I had learned to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care, rather than biological obligation. The people who had supported me during my journey from displaced teenager to successful professional had chosen to be in my life, which made their contributions infinitely more meaningful than anything based solely on shared genetics. I told them I would not provide the direct financial assistance they were seeking, because doing so would enable the poor decision-making that had created their current problems. However, I was willing to offer something potentially more valuable: advice about career development, networking opportunities, and connections to people who might be able to help them rebuild their professional lives through hard work rather than handouts. Marcus' reaction was immediate anger, accusing me of being vindictive and heartless toward family members who were struggling through circumstances beyond their control. Dylan tried a more emotional approach, reminding me of happy childhood memories and suggesting that our parents would have wanted us to support each other during difficult times. Cameron surprised me by acknowledging that my response was fair, given how they had treated me, though he still hoped I might reconsider the financial aspect of their request. I remained firm in my decision, while explaining that my boundaries were not punitive but protective. I had worked too hard building my stable, independent life to jeopardize it by taking responsibility for problems I had not created. If they wanted to rebuild relationships with me, those relationships would need to be based on mutual respect and realistic expectations, rather than crisis-driven desperation. The months following that difficult conversation brought gradual but meaningful changes in all of our lives. Marcus eventually found a new position, with a smaller law firm that paid significantly less than his previous job, but provided the steady income needed to stabilize his family financial situation. He and Jennifer were forced to downsize to a smaller home, but the reduced mortgage payments made their budget more manageable. Most importantly, Marcus began attending counseling sessions to address the stress and depression that had contributed to his career difficulties. Dylan took advantage of one of the networking connections I had provided to find work with a commercial property management company. The job required him to start at an entry-level position, despite his years of experience, but it offered opportunities for advancement based on performance rather than market fluctuations. He also enrolled in financial planning courses to develop better money management skills that would prevent future crises. His relationship with his children improved as he learned to prioritize their needs over his own comfort and convenience. Cameron used his European education and language skills to secure a position with an international consulting firm that specialized in helping American companies expand overseas. The work required extensive travel, but it paid well and utilized his unique qualifications effectively. He also began paying down his student loan debt aggressively, having learned valuable lessons about the real cost of pursuing dreams without considering practical limitations. Our relationships evolved slowly and carefully, built on small gestures and gradual trust rather than grand reconciliations. We began exchanging birthday cards and occasional text messages about major life events. Every few months, we would meet for dinner at neutral locations where we could catch up on our respective progress without the pressure of trying to recreate childhood closeness that no longer existed. I maintained my boundaries consistently while remaining open to genuine connection when it was offered authentically. They learned to respect my independence and success, rather than viewing me as a resource to be utilized during emergencies. Most importantly, we all accepted that our family relationships would never match the idealized version we had grown up believing in, but that realistic, respectful connections were still valuable, even if they looked different from what we had originally expected. The experience taught me that forgiveness does not require forgetting, and that loving someone does not mean enabling their destructive choices. I had built a life filled with people who chose to support and encourage me, from Mrs. Peterson to Ashley to my colleagues at Miller and Associates. Those relationships were based on mutual investment and genuine care, making them far more reliable than anything based solely on biological connections or childhood history. My volunteer work with foster care organizations took on deeper meaning as I shared my story with young people facing similar challenges. I could offer them something beyond sympathy proof, that abandonment by family members, while painful, does not determine the trajectory of your entire life. Some of the brightest, most successful people I knew had been forced to create their own families and support networks after being failed by the people who should have protected them. Looking back on that decade between being placed in foster care and receiving Marcus' desperate phone call, I realized that my brothers had unknowingly given me the greatest gift possible. Their abandonment had forced me to discover my own strength, resilience, and capacity for creating meaningful relationships. I had learned that family is not just about shared genetics, but about showing up consistently for the people you care about, especially during their most vulnerable moments. The scared, heartbroken 16-year-old who had been dropped off at Sunshine Group Home would barely recognize the confident, successful woman I had become. But she would be proud to know that all the pain and struggle had ultimately led to something beautiful, a life built on authentic connections, personal achievement, and the knowledge that I could handle whatever challenges the future might bring. Sometimes the people who abandon you are not your greatest loss, but your greatest teachers, showing you what true strength looks like when it comes from within, rather than from external support. I learned that you cannot control who stays in your life, but you can absolutely control who you become because of their choices. And in the end, that knowledge is worth more than all the family loyalty in the world. Let me know in the comments what you think about my decision to help my brothers rebuild their lives through guidance rather than financial support. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who treated you poorly in the past? Hit that like button if this story reminded you of your own journey toward independence and strength. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family betrayal and building the life you deserve, regardless of your starting circumstances. Share this with someone who needs to hear that abandonment is not the end of their story, but potentially the beginning of their greatest transformation. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the most painful experiences become the foundation for your most meaningful growth. Keep building the life that makes you proud, regardless of who chooses to be part of it or who chooses to walk away.